White heavy checkmark disclaimer. This story is a fictional work created purely for entertainment purposes. It does not depict any real persons, relationships, or events. Any resemblance to actual individuals, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. This story explores emotional tension, boundaries, and personal safety and is not intended to encourage or normalize inappropriate behavior. Viewer discretion is advised. When Lisa first moved into her new home in suburban Pennsylvania, she felt a mix of relief and fear. After separating from her husband of 8 years, she wanted a fresh start for herself and her 6-year-old daughter, Emma. The neighborhood was quiet, the lawns perfectly trimmed, and the neighbors seemed friendly enough. For the first time in months, she felt a hint of peace. Emma loved the new school and Lisa enjoyed the silence of not having to walk on eggshells anymore. It was a new chapter, one she promised herself would be built on independence. It wasn't long before Lisa met the couple next door. Diane and Kyle seemed like the dream neighbors, warm, sociable, and always smiling. Diane was in her early 40s, loud and chatty in the most comforting way. Kyle, her husband, was a bit more reserved but had the kind of easygoing charm that made people trust him instantly. He worked in landscaping and maintenance, always fixing or trimming something. One morning, as Lisa struggled to unload a heavy bookshelf from her SUV, Kyle appeared like clockwork. "Need a hand?" he asked, already reaching for the edge of the furniture. Lisa hesitated but nodded. "Thank you. That would be amazing." That day, Kyle not only helped carry the bookshelf inside but also offered to anchor it to the wall for safety. Lisa appreciated it. He moved with such confidence, like someone who actually knew what he was doing. It felt nice to be helped again. She had done everything on her own for so long. As he drilled the last bolt in, he looked around the room and said, "You've got a nice place here. Cozy. You're gonna do well here, Lisa." That line stuck with her, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was kind. Thoughtful, even. Diane later told her over coffee, "Kyle's like that. Can't sit still, always helping someone." Lisa smiled, thankful. Maybe the universe was giving her a break. Maybe not everyone had bad intentions. Over the next few weeks, Kyle continued to offer help. He fixed the squeaky screen door. He trimmed the hedge dividing their properties. He helped reattach the mailbox when it got knocked over by a kid on a bike. Lisa would often bring him a cold drink as a thank you, and in those moments, they shared light, harmless conversation about the weather, their pets, or which schools were the best around. But Lisa noticed something strange one afternoon when she caught him staring a second too long as she laughed at one of his jokes. There was a flicker in his eyes, curiosity? Longing? She couldn't place it. It made her feel noticed, but also oddly exposed. Still, she brushed it off. Maybe she was reading too much into it. He was married. She had just gotten out of a toxic relationship. Her guard was always up. And yet it had begun. At first, Lisa thought nothing of Kyle's continued presence. After all, it made sense. He was the type who liked to keep busy, and he genuinely seemed to enjoy lending a hand. But after that bookshelf and the mailbox, his visits began to come even when there was no visible problem. One morning, Lisa opened the door to water her plants and found Kyle already at the front gate, holding a toolbox. "Thought I'd tighten that loose hinge," he said with a friendly smile. She hadn't even noticed a problem. Lisa nodded, appreciative but a bit confused. "Oh, sure, if you've got time." From that day on, Kyle began dropping by several times a week. At first, it was minor tasks, fixing a window latch, trimming a vine that was growing too wild, checking the faucet in the laundry area. His visits were often unannounced but always polite. He never made her uncomfortable exactly, just more present than she expected. Diane didn't seem to mind either. In fact, she seemed amused by it. "You've got the best neighbor husband in town," she once joked while handing Lisa a plate of cookies. Lisa laughed along, but part of her wondered, did Diane know how often Kyle came over when she wasn't around? Then came the Sunday morning when Lisa caught Kyle raking the leaves on her lawn, without asking, without even telling her. When she stepped outside, slightly startled, he just waved and said, "Figured I'd take care of it before you got to it." "Hope that's okay." She didn't know what to say. It was kind, yes, but it was starting to feel too familiar. Lisa began keeping her doors locked during the day, not out of fear, but because she felt a growing need for space. She also stopped offering cold drinks or snacks whenever he helped, trying subtly to set boundaries. Yet Kyle never seemed offended. He continued to come, continued to help, and continued to talk like everything was normal. Then came the compliments. At first, they were vague, safe. "You've really made this place your own," or "Emma's lucky to have you." But slowly, they turned more personal. One afternoon, after helping replace a curtain rod, he looked at her and said, "You're doing a great job, Lisa." "I mean that." I know things haven't been easy, but you've got this calm strength about you. It's admirable. She froze, unsure how to respond. She smiled politely, thanked him, and excused herself to check on Emma. But something inside her stirred, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Not fear, not flattery, but unease. A signal like a soft alarm bell in the back of her mind. That night, she lay in bed wondering, was Kyle just being supportive, or was something slowly crossing a line? It didn't help that she'd seen how he looked at her once through the living room window when he thought she wasn't looking. Lisa tried to brush it off. But deep down, something was changing. And she could feel it more and more every time he showed up without knocking. The shift in Kyle's behavior wasn't drastic at first. It crept in like a fog, slow, almost invisible, until Lisa realized she could no longer see things clearly. What used to be casual comments became more emotionally loaded. "You're really beautiful when you laugh," he said one afternoon while fixing the hinges on her back door. Lisa blinked, unsure if she heard him correctly. He didn't wait for a reply, he just smiled and moved on like nothing had happened. She tried to convince herself it was harmless. Maybe it was just awkward phrasing. Maybe Kyle didn't mean anything by it. After all, she'd just gotten out of a marriage where every word was a weapon. Perhaps she was still too guarded, too sensitive. But the compliments didn't stop. On another afternoon, while they stood in the yard watching Emma chase Bubbles with Diane's dog, Kyle leaned in and said, "You know, if I'd met someone like you years ago, maybe life would have been different." His voice was low, almost a whisper. Lisa felt her stomach turn. The moment was heavy, uncomfortable. She faked a chuckle and replied, "Well, here we are now," trying to deflect. But Kyle's eyes stayed on her a second too long. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. The words replayed in her mind over and over. She had ignored the signs because she didn't want to create tension in the neighborhood, especially not with Diane. But now she couldn't deny it. Kyle was crossing boundaries. Still, she said nothing. She didn't want to cause drama or make assumptions that could hurt Diane. Lisa started setting firmer physical boundaries, keeping her door closed when Kyle was in the yard, always stepping back when he got too close. But it didn't seem to work. One evening, as Lisa came home from work, she found a small bag of groceries on her porch. A post-it on top read, "Thought you might need this. K." Her hands went cold. Kyle had never been invited to do this. She hadn't even mentioned she was low on supplies. Had he been watching her again? Later that week, Kyle knocked on her door past 9 p.m. He was clearly drunk, swaying slightly. "Do you have any painkillers?" he slurred. "My back's been killing me." Lisa, startled, stepped out and closed the door halfway behind her. "I'm sorry, Kyle. I don't have any. You should probably head home." He leaned a hand against the wall, his eyes dull but determined. "You're always so strong, Lisa. I don't think you realize how attractive that is." This time, Lisa didn't respond. She simply stepped back inside and locked the door. That was the moment it stopped being harmless. That was the moment she knew something was wrong. Lisa hoped that night would be the end of it, that Kyle, embarrassed or sobered up, would retreat quietly into the arms of his wife and forget whatever strange dynamic he thought existed between them. But he didn't. In fact, something changed. There was a boldness in him now, a quiet confidence that made Lisa feel even more unsafe. He started lingering when they spoke, leaning closer than before, letting his eyes travel in ways that made her stomach knot. One afternoon, while Emma was at a play date and Diane was out shopping, Kyle showed up again. This time, with no toolbox, no excuse. Just a bottle of iced tea in one hand and a tired smile on his face. "I just needed a break," he said. "Mind if I sit?" Lisa hesitated but nodded slowly, not wanting to escalate things. She sat across from him at the patio table, arms folded. The silence was thick. Then Kyle spoke. Quiet, slow, as if choosing every word carefully. "You know, Lisa, my marriage isn't what it used to be." She didn't respond. He continued, "Diane and I, we barely talk. We sleep in different rooms. It's like we're just pretending now. For the neighbors. For the routine." Lisa felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was no longer small talk. This was confession. An emotional grenade dropped quietly on her patio. "I see you," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Raising Emma on your own. Still smiling. Still holding everything together. You're different." She stood up slowly. "Kyle, I'm sorry you're going through that. But this," she gestured between them, "this isn't appropriate." He didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to make a move," he said. though his tone said otherwise. I feel like you understand me in a way she doesn't. Lisa felt her heart pounding. This wasn't just a neighbor looking for help anymore. This was a man actively trying to form a bond that didn't belong to him. You need to go home, she said firmly. There was a long pause. Then Kyle stood up, his face unreadable. Okay, he said softly. Sorry if I crossed a line. But the line had already been crossed and he had stepped over it with both feet. That night, Lisa double-locked her doors. She checked the windows 3 times. When she kissed Emma goodnight, her hands trembled. There was a pit in her stomach that wouldn't go away, not just from fear, but from the weight of knowing she might have to destroy her peaceful new start just to protect it. The next day, she installed a smart doorbell camera. She didn't tell Diane. Not yet. But she began to realize that this wasn't just about Kyle's flirtation or loneliness. It was something deeper, more dangerous. Something that came wearing a friendly smile and lived right next door. After Kyle's subtle confession and emotional overreach, Lisa knew she had to take action, but not in a way that would set off alarm bells or cause drama. Diane was still her neighbor, and Emma was growing close to their daughter, Ellie. The last thing she wanted was an open conflict. But her instincts, sharpened by the trauma of her previous marriage, screamed at her to create distance. She started with small things. She no longer answered the door immediately when Kyle knocked. Sometimes she didn't answer at all. When she saw him working in the yard, she stayed inside. She removed the spare key hidden under the flower pot and stopped parking in her usual spot, just in case he was watching her patterns. Every gesture, every move was now calculated, not out of fear of what he'd already done, but of what he might do next. Lisa also began saying no, clearly and politely, every time Kyle offered to help. He offered to replace a broken garden light. She said she'd already hired someone. He noticed her car tires looked low. She told him she had it checked yesterday. Every time he pushed a little, she pulled away more. Kyle noticed. The warmth in his voice began to cool. His greetings became shorter, his eye contact sharper, clipped. The casual smiles disappeared. One day, Lisa overheard him talking to Diane loudly enough for her to catch fragments. Doesn't even say thanks anymore, cold as hell. She wasn't sure if it was about her, but it felt like it. Then came the night she heard tapping on her side window. It was around 10:30 p.m. Lisa had already put Emma to bed and was doing dishes. The sound was faint but rhythmic, like a finger drumming on glass. She froze. Her hands stopped moving. The sink kept running. She turned off the faucet and waited. The tapping stopped. When she peered through the blinds, no one was there. But the motion sensor light by the fence had turned on. Her doorbell camera hadn't picked up anything directly. But when she replayed the clip, a faint shadow moved along the far side of the yard, just outside the camera's frame. Lisa's skin crawled. She made an anonymous call to the non-emergency police line and reported possible prowling in the area. A patrol car came by, slow and quiet. They didn't find anything, but promised to keep an eye out. The next morning, Kyle didn't wave. He didn't say anything. He just stared from his porch, coffee in hand, as Lisa walked Emma to the car. The stare was long, blank, and unmistakably cold. That was when Lisa knew. This was no longer about attraction, flirtation, or loneliness. This was about control. Kyle wasn't upset that Lisa didn't reciprocate. He was upset that she dared to pull away. And for Lisa, that meant only one thing. She was right to be afraid. The air was heavy that night, thick with summer humidity and something Lisa couldn't name, dread, maybe, or an instinct that had nowhere to hide. It had been nearly a week since she had seen Kyle face to face, but she could feel his presence. The silence between them had become louder than any conversation. The looks, the tension, the way he would sometimes stand outside too long, pretending to water the lawn, his eyes drifting toward her windows. Lisa kept the blinds closed and the doors locked. That evening, Lisa tucked Emma into bed a little earlier than usual. She kissed her forehead and whispered, "I love you," but the words came out tight, forced. After checking the locks again, she sat in the living room, trying to focus on a book but barely turning the pages. Every creak of the house felt sharper than usual. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. It was just past 11:30 p.m. when she heard it. A faint noise, scraping, like fingernails on the wooden back door. Lisa's entire body froze. She reached slowly for her phone and opened the app for the doorbell camera. Nothing at the front. She tiptoed to the hallway, heart pounding, and opened the camera feed for the side yard. There, barely in the corner of the frame, was a figure. Tall, male, moving. Her throat closed. The figure circled back, walking slowly toward the back door, staying low. He tried the handle. Locked. Then he stood there for several long seconds, just breathing, visible in profile from the floodlight that flicked on. It was Kyle. Lisa's shaking hand dialed 911. The operator kept her calm, instructed her to stay inside, assured her a unit was on the way. Lisa huddled in the dark corner of the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gripping the small flashlight she'd tucked beside the fire extinguisher weeks ago. Minutes passed like hours. Outside, Kyle paced. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the house, occasionally glancing toward the upstairs windows. Emma's room. Then came the flashing lights. The patrol car turned the corner with its spotlight already sweeping. Kyle stepped back from the door just as the light hit him full in the face. He raised a hand like he'd been caught doing something innocent. The officer stepped out, hand near his holster, calling out. Lisa didn't hear what they said. She didn't care. All she knew was that Kyle was finally being pulled away from her home, hand gesturing casually as he tried to explain. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't cuffed. But he was escorted home. The next morning, Lisa called a lawyer and started the process of filing for a restraining order. She also wrote a long email to Diane. She didn't know if it would destroy their lives. But she knew this. Kyle had stepped beyond any boundary, and she would never allow him that close again. Lisa barely slept the night after the incident. Though the police had walked Kyle back to his house without arrest, the silence between their homes now felt like a wall of glass, tense, transparent, and ready to shatter. The next morning, she stood by the window, sipping coffee with shaking hands, eyes fixed on the house next door. No sign of movement. No Diane. No Kyle. Just the stillness of a neighborhood unaware that something had already broken. Later that afternoon, Lisa heard a knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and her heart stopped. It wasn't Kyle. It was Diane. Lisa opened the door slowly, cautiously. Diane stood there with puffy eyes and a folded piece of paper clutched in her hand. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" They sat outside on the front steps. For a while, Diane didn't say anything. Then, in a voice so low Lisa barely heard it, she said, "I found this in Kyle's phone last night." She unfolded the paper. It was a printed text thread, unsent messages Kyle had typed out and saved. They were all addressed to Lisa. "I think about you more than I should. You make me feel like myself again. Sometimes I wonder if we were meant to end up next door." There were dozens. Lisa felt sick. "I didn't know," Diane whispered, tears streaming now. "I thought you were just being distant. I thought you didn't like me. But it was him. He was obsessed with you." Lisa sat silently. There were no words for the strange shame and sadness curling inside her. She wasn't the villain. She wasn't the reason. But it still felt dirty, heavy, like a trespass had happened on her soul and now someone else was paying for it too. "I'm leaving him," Diane said. "I don't care how it looks. I don't care what the neighbors say. I can't stay with someone who hides messages for another woman, who prowls around like a ghost in someone else's yard." Lisa reached out and touched her hand. "I never encouraged it, Diane. Not once." "I know," she nodded, shaking. "I just needed to hear that from you." That night, Diane packed a car with 2 suitcases and drove away. Kyle was nowhere in sight. 2 days later, a moving truck came. By the end of the week, the house next door was dark and empty. Lisa stood on her porch, Emma holding her hand. They watched the truck disappear, neither of them speaking. It wasn't victory. It wasn't justice. It was fallout. But as the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows stretched long across the lawn, Lisa felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. The air felt breathable again. The weight on her chest had lightened. Sometimes healing didn't feel like celebration. Sometimes it just meant the fear was finally gone. Weeks passed, and with each one, the quiet grew softer. Less like a warning and more like a comfort. The house next door remained empty, the for sale sign swaying slightly in the breeze. The absence of Kyle, of his eyes peering through fences and his footsteps creeping near windows, was like a wound closing in reverse, slow but healing. Lisa reclaimed her life inch by inch. The lock stayed in place, the doorbell camera stayed active, but her breathing no longer caught at every knock or passing shadow. She got back to planting flowers in the yard, taking morning walks with Emma, and even laughing again. Real laughter, not the nervous kind she used to offer when things felt off. She never received a message from Kyle. No apology. No acknowledgement. But she didn't need one. What she needed was space. And now she finally had it. Emma seemed to sense the change too. Her drawings became brighter. She slept more soundly. One night, she looked up from her cereal and said, "I like our house again, Mommy." Lisa nearly cried at that. Children always know, even when you try to shield them. The restraining order had been granted quietly, filed and approved without confrontation. Lisa never saw Kyle again. Diane, she heard through a mutual acquaintance, had moved closer to her sister in another state and started working at a small bookstore. Lisa wished her well in silence, sending strength with every memory that surfaced. But the biggest change came from within. Lisa had once doubted her own instincts, brushed off red flags, questioned her reactions, tried to avoid drama. But now she understood something powerful. Setting boundaries wasn't rude, it was survival. And trusting your gut wasn't overreacting, it was wisdom earned through experience. She started journaling again, something she hadn't done since before her divorce. She filled pages with memories, reflections, even the fear of writing it down as a way to exhale it all. And somewhere in those scribbled pages, Lisa found her voice again. One evening, while watching Emma play in the yard, Lisa sat on the porch and sipped her tea. The wind was calm, the leaves rustling like whispers of peace. She glanced toward the house next door, now just another building, no longer haunted by a gaze or tension. And then, quietly to herself, she said, "No one will ever make me feel unsafe in my own home again." It wasn't a dramatic vow. It wasn't shouted. It was a promise. A truth. Lisa had walked through something dark, something terrifying, but she had walked through it. Not around. Not under. Through. And on the other side, she hadn't just survived. She had taken her life back.